I just want to ask the two of you one question. Is the technological gap between humans and Trisolarans greater than the one between locusts and humans? The question hit the two scientists like a bucket of cold water. Do you have a sports update?
Well, yeah, you do.
Oh, well, yeah, I went to an ultimate frisbee tournament and did not get injured.
Welcome to sports in your 40s, everyone. I did the thing and I didn't get hurt.
Which is amazing.
It is amazing.
I was completely ready to just pull a muscle on Saturday and spend the rest of the tournament taking photos. That was like my expectation, I got through the whole thing. Yeah, well, maybe we should get into it because I am going to do some more cooking tonight. We are talking about the second half of Cixin Liu's The Three-Body Problem. Let me find the rundown. Yeah, Three-Body Problem here too. We read to almost the end of part 2 last time, but part 2 concludes with a few more three-body game doings where Wang Miao returns to the game one more time. I don't remember if you had read the apogee scene where all the Trisolarans get sucked into the sun.
No. That was the very next chapter.
Okay.
And you got the text message from me the next day that was like, Chapter 19 is like a Neal Stephenson fever dream.
It's insane. So there is this amazing scene where the three suns are in apogee and creates like a super gravity, which almost destroys the planet of Trisolaris. They somehow survive, even though most of the Trisolarans literally get sucked off the surface of the planet into the sun. And then Wang Miao logs in again, and it's like, I don't know, a million years later, there's this huge jump in the civilization of Trisolaris. One gets the sense maybe the author is getting a bit fatigued, but he's like, yeah, okay, we're a super advanced civilization now. We've gone from early industrial age to way advanced of Earth, and we have spaceships, and we figured out we gotta leave here. But lucky for us, there's a planet 4 light years away, and Wang Miao is like, that's interesting. The nearest, solar system for my planet is 4 light years away, and they're like, yeah, that's it's a pretty usual sort of spacing thing.
Simple distance. Everything's 4 light years from everything else.
Yeah, exactly. So don't worry about it.
Do not look behind the curtain.
Right, exactly. And so then there's this final, this other three-body club meetup, and the guy at the meetup is like, okay, you guys all made it. You won the game, which means you can learn the secret. Three-body is a real place. And are you committed to, the loyalty that you showed during the game? And about half the people are there like, yeah, no. And the other half of the people are like, sure, yeah, I'll help Three-body do whatever it has to do next. And so that gets Wang Miao an invitation to the next meeting, which kicks off part 3 of the book.
Yeah. Yeah, and he goes to this next meeting where there are many people. Like the first meetup he went to, I think there's 8 people, something like that. And there's probably dozens, if not hundreds
in a deserted factory cafeteria, which is just a wonderful detail.
Oh, it's such a good detail. Yeah, anytime there's worker details, you're like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
Okay, everybody. This is a complicated book. We're going to do our best.
Yeah.
There are 2 sects. There will eventually be a 3rd sect of what is called the Earth Trisolaran Organization. 2 sects are called Adventists and Reformists. Redemptionists. And we get a surprise. Yawinsea, the scientist that we have spent a lot of time in the first half of the book, who sent out the original message and then replied to the message that she got back from Trisolaris. She is the commander of this organization. We get to see this internal conflict where the guy who has kind of been bringing people into the organization is accused of betraying the organization. He is quickly killed. Then we get a series of flashbacks that kind of bring us up to speed on what happened to Ye Wenseia during her time at Red Coast. I'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, and this is where we actually learn that she did, in fact, send a broadcast to an alien civilization. So prior, what we had learned was the reveal was that was the point of the, the antenna. But we get a scene where she actually sends out a broadcast, and then some time goes by, several years, and she gets a response. And basically the response is, you're really lucky you got me instead of anybody else who lives here because I'm a pacifist. And if anybody else had heard this, they would come to your planet and colonize it. So don't respond. We won't know where this message came from if you don't respond. Literally, the message is do not respond, do not respond, do not respond. And Ye Wenseia thinks about it for a day or two and then is like, yeah, come to this planet and conquer it because we can't solve our own problems there. Sort of under the logic that if this civilization is advanced enough to be spacefaring, then they must have solved their petty, conflicts like war and things like that, which she turns out to be wrong about, as we'll learn in the latter half of the book. But then in the cafeteria, there's another wonderful surprise.
Our favorite
corrupt cop.
Our favorite corrupt cop, who is quickly becoming our favorite protagonist. Da Shi leads a raid on the cafeteria, and he captures Ye Wenseia with this really clever ploy. One of the members of the ETO basically is like, I have a nuclear bomb. If you shoot me, I'm going to blow it up. And what they do instead is basically shoot the casing of the bomb, which sets off the conventional explosives, doesn't blow up the bomb, kills the person who's threatening it, drenches a whole bunch of people in a lot of radiation, but they are able to capture Ye Wenseia and this group of people in the Earth Trisolaris organization. Because they've captured Ye Wenseia, now we get a series of interviews with an interrogator that helps fill in even more information about what happened during her time at Red Coast. We discover that Commissar Lei, one of the other people at Red Coast, also found out about the message, and so she murders him. And in this sort of heartbreaking moment, she realizes that she has to kill her husband because he joins the Commissar in the project that he's working on. And Ye Wenseia is like, this is the only time I can kill Commissar Lei and keep the secret from getting out. So she kills both of them in a very cold-blooded manner,
cutting their rope when they're hanging over the side of a cliff. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's awful.
Yeah.
And then she sits up there, sort of.
She's not happy about killing her husband, but she also doesn't see a way out of it, apart from getting caught, and she's not willing to do that.
Yeah, Ye Wenseia is endlessly pragmatic in the pursuit of not just avenging her father, but sort of avenging the system that killed her father. But she learns that she's pregnant. She gets very sick. She moves to a nearby village. She sort of helps become a teacher there. Her attitude towards humanity softens a bit, which, you sort of think that probably had to happen narratively. And then she meets this environmentalist named Mike Evans, who's the son of an American oil magnate who has billions of dollars. And he is trying to save a species of swallow that is being eradicated because the Chinese are just cutting down all the forests. And he believes that humanity ought to be destroyed to protect the planet. I'll kick it back over to you.
Yeah, and Ye Wenseia doesn't really believe this. She is still hopeful that the Trisolarans, when they come, will actually kind of restore a beneficial order that will save humanity, which proves naive. But she is also, I think part of that is we understand that she's more moral than Mike Evans, because she does have good intentions to some degree. So as this interrogation is happening, they get enough intelligence about Mike Evans, who's now, I think, in his 50s or 60s, and he has built a new version of the Red Coast antenna, and he keeps it on a ship, a converted supertanker. And they're like, well, we want to get his records of his conversations with the Trisolarans, which is on the ship, but he's gonna, he'll destroy them if he gets any wind that they're being attacked or evaded. So Da Shi comes up with this ingenious trap where they're going to basically lay these, sharper than razor monowire, monofilament, what do they call it? The nanomaterial, molecule thick wire in a net across the Panama Canal. And the ship's going to sail through it, and it's going to be sliced into 10-centimeter sections. And everybody will be killed, including some innocents, unfortunately, but then they'll be able to recover the electronics. Yep. And that's exactly what happens.
It's a hard-boiled egg slicer for a supertanker.
Exactly. And they slice it up. It is horrific. It is kind of wonderfully horrific. There's a great scene where Dasha is like, you guys don't have any better ideas? Well, I guess I'll have to come up with one. And then, sort of drops everybody's jaw with this hideous idea, which works. And so they go through the communications, and then, we get the rest of the exposition that kind of explains all of the mystery of the first few chapters. So we have this explanation of why Earth's physics has been going haywire, which is the Trisolarans have, after a series of amazing failed experiments, created a supercomputer that exists as a single proton called a sophon. So they are basically able to unfold it from 7 dimensions into 3, which makes it really, really big. And then they create the computer on the proton surface, and then they collapse it back to 1 dimension, and then they accelerate it towards Earth. In this supercomputer, which is the size of 1 proton, it has quantum entanglement with another twin proton. So essentially, whatever it does, the other proton on Trisolaris does, and so they can spy on Earth. And not only can they spy, but they can disrupt Earth experiments like super colliders, and they can create illusions like the one that Wang Miao, when he's seeing the exposed film or he's seeing the countdown in his eye, the sophons are creating that. They can even make the cosmic background radiation blink as an illusion in our eyes. And so then humans figure this out, and they're like, oh, this is why our science isn't working. But the Trisolarans are basically like, yeah, but there's nothing you can do about it. And they send a message, you are bugs, into everybody's retina. And sort of the last 2 chapters are kind of an epilogue where humans are like, wow, we're going to be invaded in 400 years, and the Trisolarans have figured out how to stop us from advancing scientifically. So we're not going to be able to develop the technology to repel this invasion.
And the last thing we get, 2 last things we kind of get. Yeah. Wang Miao and Ding Yi are just totally wasted, and Da Shi, it's great. Like, it's a wonderful
Da Shi, our favorite detective, come here, have a drink with us.
It's this great flip-flop. It's such a brilliant inversion. Yeah. And like, that's one of my favorite things about this is that Da Shi continues to be one of the wiser characters among this sea of incredibly smart and scientifically and militarily capable people. Yeah. Mostly because he comes at it from a perspective of sort of common sense and thinking outside the box. Da Shi takes them to a field with locusts and points out that humans have never managed to conquer these particular bugs, which is true. I mean, that's one of our sayings, right? Like, insects will inherit the earth. And then we get another one where Yawensea goes to the ruins of Red Coast Base and goes up on the peak and watches the sunset and contemplates sunset for humanity. I'm going to start a timer, and let's get into it. This is such a wild invention, this book. Yeah. And obviously, listeners, quite complicated from what's going on kind of phase. Like, you kind of have to hang with some fairly gnarly science stuff, but he does it really well. It doesn't ever really feel like it's kind of dragging, but I'm really curious about your question about mystery and structure.
Well, I want to start with a reading to get into that. So nice. So we didn't quite read the first 2 parts. It would have been interesting because the third act of the book feels in many respects very different than the first two, in the sense that all the mysteries are resolved. And essentially, like, the third act of the book is there's a little bit of action. There's the amazing Supertanker scene, and there's the invasion, but it's a lot of exposition. It's a lot of flashback. It's a lot of interrogation. And it's basically allowing us to make sense of everything that happened in the first two chapters. So I just want to read this moment. So at the beginning of part 3, we get this chapter, Rebels of Earth, and we're like, at first it's sort of, it's plodding along the way it's been plodding along. Wong Miao goes to this cafeteria. There are a bunch of people there. Pan Han is kind of defending his action, committing this murder that we read about. And then we have someone yelled, "The commander is here." The crowd parted to form a path. Wong looked up and felt dizzy. The world turned white and black in his eyes, and the only spot of color was the person who had just appeared. Surrounded by a group of young bodyguards, the commander-in-chief of the Earth Trisolaris rebels, Ye Wenxia, walked steadily into the crowd. Ye stood into the middle of the space, and the crowd cleared for her, raised a bony fist with a resolve and strength that Wang could not have believed she possessed, and said, "Eliminate human tyranny!" The crowd responded in a way that clearly had been rehearsed countless times. "The world belongs to Trisolaris!" "Hello, comrades," Ye said. Her voice returned to the gentleness that Wong knew. It was only now that he could really be sure it was her. "I haven't been well lately and haven't spent much time with all of you, but now the situation is urgent, and I know everyone is under a great deal of pleasure. So I've come to see you." Did you see that coming?
No.
How did that... I have a follow-up question, but at first, could you talk a little bit about how did it feel? How did that moment feel narratively to you?
It didn't feel implausible. Like it wasn't one of those surprises where I was like, "Oh, and bullshit."
Yeah.
I didn't have that sense at all. And it made me realize that the characterization of Ye Wenxia is really quite excellent in the first 2/3 of the book.
Because there are explanations for her behavior.
Yes. Yeah, so it's a surprise, but it doesn't feel implausible. And everything in this book, like a lot of the action is surprising because we are dealing with something that is, has never happened before. But this feels possible. And it even feels possible and plausible that she's kind of the commander and Mike Evans turns out to be not the extremist, but definitely more of a fundamentalist, somebody that we have to be worried about. And I think also I've been thinking a lot about what is the argument of the book? Like, what is he trying to say? And as I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, I think that one of the ideas that this book is wrestling with is like, who gets to say what tyranny is? And the ways that what I think is tyranny might just be your, like Soviet Socialist Republic, or your, like People's Republic, basically.
Well, let's put a pin on that because actually
I think we're going to come back to that.
Relates
both of us.
to another question that I
Totally.
want to ask you. So I want to ask you this, my follow-up question. That moment and that whole chapter really reminded me of a moment and a structural move in a book that you and I have read and talked about.
Okay.
And I'm curious, I'll tell you, but I'm curious if you can guess which one.
I'm leaning Diamond Age, but I don't know why.
Yeah, I could see that because of the sort of like protagonist goes away for a while and then does something weird and surprising, sort of like you don't quite know what's going on. Then they prove to be very, very like influential in a way that you didn't quite see coming. What I'm thinking of is A Study in Scarlet. To me, Ye Wenxia being revealed as the commander felt very much like Sherlock Holmes saying to Lestrade and the other one, "Gentlemen, I present Mr. Jefferson Hope, the murderer."
Yeah.
And you're like, what? And then the rest of the book is like, who the fuck is Jefferson Hope?
then we got to go back,
and we got to
unpack it.
And how did they figure this out? And I think it's not exactly the same because we already know this character, but I feel like it's the same way in that we're kept in the dark. We're kept in the dark. We don't know what's going on, and then suddenly we're given this incredible fact that is like, what? This is amazing. And then the rest of the book is just explaining everything that's happened up to that point with like a little bit additional plot, like maybe in the like capture of Yewencia and then in the Supertanker scene. But apart from that, it's all flashback. And I was like, he quotes from A Study in Scarlet earlier, and I just like, I have to think Cixin Liu got that idea from A Study in Scarlet, which is like, what if the first half of the book is this mystery that you don't understand, and then what if, it's not really the third, because it's the third act, but what if 2/3 of the way through, I reveal the mystery, but you still don't understand what's going on, and then the rest of it, you're hooked. The rest of it is just exposition in flashback. Because to me, that feels like the exact same structure as A Study in Scarlet, which is, and I can't think of another book that does that.
Yeah, I think you and I, this is great. I think we are angling towards the same sort of ideas, but arrived at separately, which is good. That's a good sign about both the book and about our sensitivity. My next question, if you were done with that one, kind of like goes the same way. Okay, it's kind of also a surprise question, and it's a little bit of a two-parter. Okay, so Dasha and the police show up at the cafeteria, and there's this sort of badass like female ninja with a nuke, and like you're definitely like, female raven? Okay.
She's already killed Pan Han by breaking his neck. Even though she's like petite and
like grotesquely described.
Yeah.
Like that neck breaking.
Yep.
Were you surprised that it's not Dasha's plan, it's someone else, it's the explosive expert's plan.
But Dasha figures out how to pull it off tactically.
Yeah. Were you surprised that basically went off without a hitch?
No, because I think this is meant to be Dasha's superpower, right? It's already been established. He's on the kind of like military task force for a reason, right? And it's not just because it's not just for entertainment, although he is very entertaining. And it's not just to like bring Wang Miao into the fold, although he does manage to do that and sort of serve as a mentor figure. And this is the thing that he's good at. And I feel like it's not surprising for any major character in a novel to have one thing that they're good at. And this is the thing it's good at, and it's entirely consistent with what we know about him from his kind of hard-boiled cop mentality, and then it continues to be consistent when he comes up with the netting plan. So no, I wasn't terribly surprised by that, although there is a way in which I think Cixin Liu introduces characters and sometimes just dispenses with them because they're no longer needed. And that sort of like female subcommandant character, definitely, she appears, she does one thing, and then she is dispatched.
Got it. So I totally understand why that wouldn't be surprising that goes off without a hitch. How about your anticipation of the Supertanker trap? As the tension of that was building, again, I'm just going to ask you the same thing. Were you surprised that activity also went off without a hitch?
No, I don't think so. I think because there's something about the nature of this book that I think I've gotten used to by now, which is that we're on a roller coaster.
Yeah, okay.
And, and that we're doing something like the Diamond Age, and we're doing something like the first half of Project Hail Mary, and we're doing something like, I'm trying to think of our other hapless protagonists. Maybe the Diamond Age and The Arrest are the two best examples, which is, this is not a book about characters taking action, really, and changing the world around them. This is a book about characters who are swept up in the forces of the world around them. And, you know, you and I talked about this last time. I think it's very character-driven, but it's not character-driven in the sense that the characters drive the plot. The plot does drive the characters. Yeah. And to the degree to which it's character-driven, I think he is intrigued by how these forces that drive the characters' life impact them emotionally and shape them emotionally. And so to me, it's character-driven in that sense. It's not character-driven in the way that The Expanse is or Game of Thrones is, where we're getting these heroic stories of characters taking on a mantle and choosing to do something, to become impactful in a way. Instead, I mean, Da Shi does sort of do that, but he's not really even a protagonist, right? Like, Wang Miao is the protagonist. Yeah. Da Shi is almost like, it's interesting because he's kind of a mentor figure, but he takes way more action than Wang Miao does. And but I think we've kind of established this. Like, you remember how we were talking about Journeyman's sister Madeline in The Arrest? Yes. And we're like, it would be boring if Madeline was the protagonist because she has the plan that goes off without a hitch. So instead, we have to make Journeyman the protagonist because he doesn't know that's going to happen. And so then, and, you know, Da Shi isn't even there when the Supertanker plan happens. We see it all through Wang Miao's eyes. And it's, you know, it's also horrific. Yeah, it's a great set piece. The reason I ask is like, and this is, you know, what I realized is as the Supertanker was approaching, I was like, oh my gosh, I have been so conditioned by plot-heavy novels and movies. And like, I was like, we're 2/3 of the way through the book. This is the moment when something bad happens. Right. Like the forces of good are like, you know, are moving towards the thing, and then there is some setback and the actual resolution comes from a different direction. Right. Or the zither, it's like you know, Doc in Back to the Future has to climb to the clock tower and fix the, you know, like something goes wrong and one of the characters has to intervene and make sure they actually all get sliced, you know, or like, we got to do plan B. Because tension, right? Because narrative tension. Yeah. And so I think I was like, okay, this is very clearly a moment that narrative tension has to go up. And in both of those scenes, it doesn't. Yeah. The good guys, and I called this in the rundown, unthwarted plans. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the time, the action of books and movies like this are how the plans are thwarted and how our protagonists deal with them. And so kind of like what you're talking about, very much in the same way of Study in Scarlet, we've talked about the chessboard setting up and being knocked down. Yeah. My theory for the way that the second half of this book works is a chess match in reverse. We are simply watching everything moving backwards and the chess pieces being returned to their original locations. That makes it all make sense again. And because I was really sort of surprised and dislocated. I was like, everything seems to be going very well. Yeah. And there's 200 more pages. Well, what's going to happen? Well, yeah, but it's all of that. All it does, the MacGuffin of that particular adventure, is the hard drive, which gets us the communications with Trisolaran, which is when we'll learn it doesn't matter how well that plan worked. All that plan does is just reveal the depths of humanity's bescrewedness, I guess, I don't know if anyone's ever said that phrase before, but, and so that's where the escalation comes. And I think there's another thing that Cixin Liu is doing that I really like, but I think other people apparently don't enjoy this that much, which is that sort of like the narrative tension comes from the horrific cost of the victory. So even if we decide that the human coalition are the good guys in this case, we learn that the Panama captain is going to get sliced into pieces. And then we have that scene where there's a guy just hosing down the deck, and who knows if he knows what that he's betraying Earth or not, but he gets he gets sliced off and he tries to crawl, but his hands have been sliced off. And there's this, just horrific moment. And I think so the narrative tension doesn't come from will they, won't they pull this off. It comes from a brutal examination of the cost of victory in this particular case. And I think the book does that a lot. Like puts people, often we just get very close to a character who like the watcher, the listener, who,
oh my God,
who is essentially a prisoner of his own civilization, right? He has a terrible life. And I think that actually, like, that bridges to my next question, which I think I might ask. I will just say as a warning to both of us that I have seen Cixin Liu in interviews get combative when people say some element of these books are particularly Chinese for one reason or another. There's this one review that talks about China's 100 years of humiliation, and that being kind of like, psychologically essential to the sort of evil of the Trisolarans. And it's a Canadian reviewer, and he's like, oh yeah, Canada. Can you think of any civilization that like took over someone else's home and then subjected them to ruination and misery? So Cixin Liu can any way you answer this question, just be prepared for Cixin Liu to at you. But
he's gonna Kool-Aid man through the wall and lecture me about confusing speaker and author.
Right, exactly. But with that said,
speaker, not author.
Well, I'm not asking you necessarily about what is the philosophical thing here. But many people, when they recommend this book to other people, say it's written from a Chinese cultural perspective, so my question is, do you see a Chinese cultural perspective in this book? And if so, where? And we're going to read the other two books, so I might return to this question because I think it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I found myself wrestling with this question a lot. I even copied down below a little section from an interview where he said, my personal view is that there should not be just one single paradigm for science fiction. There should be various kinds of science fiction. Of course, some writers will use science fiction or elements of fantasy to allegorize reality, to be critical of reality, and to represent and reflect upon reality. This kind of science fiction gained a particular name in Chinese. Chinese critics like to label it science fantasy realism. But as for me, I'm not interested in this approach, tradition, or tendency. I'm not interested in allegorizing, criticizing, or representing reality. For me, the most valuable, the most precious part of science fiction is that we can build a world entirely based on imagination. Everything is purely up in the air. That kind of fantastic imagination is the reason why I love science fiction.
Very interesting.
And I think that is a admirable and noble statement and thing to say.
Yeah.
And I think he should be a little more understanding of people that are going to read this book and find echoes of the author's cultural history. I think, like I said earlier, I don't know if this is directly about Chinese cultural history and the Cultural Revolution. I think this is more about the way that not just humanity, but apparently all species, it's impossible to agree upon what is tyrannical and what is heroic. That, again, like, what I think is oppression, you might just think is like sound policy, and I think that's what's so interesting about this book is we can see so many, the listener section, like I found to be very evocative of authoritarian societies and things like that. And I'm trying to thread the needle here by holding him to account for like, come on, man, you have to understand that people are going to pick up on, there are very clear parallels to what's going on. But then also say, I think it's probably reductive to say that this is just Chinese cultural history. And I think that is probably saying something more about not just human nature, but perhaps sentient nature. Mm-hmm. And that's why he says that it lives in the imagination. Because, you know, like we can totally imagine a race of aliens that is not like this. But if this race of aliens has lived through eons and 200 civilizations of utter disaster, you can understand why they would be aggressive. And the calmness and numbness part of the listener's plight, that's the part that I wanted to read. That's the part that got me really thinking of authoritarian societies. Because like if you wanted to survive in East Germany, like you had to turn it off.
Yeah.
You had to not react to the awful things that were happening around you and portray that in a veneer of calmness. And I think the four Red Guard soldiers that kill Ye Wensea's father, they kind of stand in for that numbness, where they have been so oppressed and so threatened that they can't feel anymore. And so I think it is a very fair reading to connect this book to elements of Chinese cultural history, but I think it is a more expansive reading to just widen it out to the idea of like sentient nature in general.
Well, yeah, so a couple thoughts about that. And one is when I read what Cixin Liu has said here, part of what I see is somebody who is protecting himself in an authoritarian state from being accused of creating an allegory that critiques that state.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm sure that if he heard me say that, would object, or I suspect, but maybe because he has to. And, you know, he has defended Chinese policy with the Rohingya, you know, which I strongly disagree with. And I don't know whether that's truly how he feels or if he is just aware that he's probably being watched and listened to and needs to toe a certain party line. You know, he is critical of the Cultural Revolution, but so has become the Communist Chinese Party. I do think you're right that he's interested in sentient beings and not China. And I do think we should get to your reading of The Watcher. I think, having read the other books too, but even in this one, I think you see this. I don't disagree with your characterization of like what is tyranny and what's not tyranny. Another way of putting it is I think he's often putting people who hold conflicting but still admirable values at odds in different ways and seeing what happens. You know, that Mike Evans and Ye Wenxia are not entirely wrong with their critiques of human culture. Da Shi is not entirely a good guy. You know, the Trisolarans, as we come to understand them, are not entirely... It's not his sort of view of how their culture has evolved is based on a planet that is just inhospitable. That feels plausible. And the idea that they would reach the conclusion that they just have to escape and that if any other civilization gets in their way, well, that's just too bad. I mean, there are plenty of human civilizations that have behaved that way for much less cause. And so I think that that's what he's doing. And I think that he's not saying, oh, it's better to be Trisolaran than human. It's better to be Ye Wenxia than Mike Evans. It's better to be Da Shi than Ye Wenxia. They're all flawed. You know, maybe Wang Miao's not exactly flawed and Ding Yi, but they're also kind of helpless. They're just like the kids in the roller coaster that the grown-ups are driving around.
They're the smart guys.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are figuring it out. And so like
they're us though,
totally.
They're just us, and they can't do anything about any of this. And whereas all the other characters I've named are in fact impacting the world, and they're all doing it for reasons that are understandable. And I think that's what Cixin Liu is trying to do. And that's why, again, I would say it's character driven, including the Trisolarans, is he's trying to create circumstances. It's sort of like Walter White. You're like, what would it take for what seems to be an ordinary middle class, perfectly healthy, or not healthy, but perfectly safe guy to become a drug lord? Well, let's see if we can do that. And I think there's a similar thing going on here. But I'd love to hear your reading of the watchers, or the listener section. I'm curious which part of it is, because there was much about that section that
so
struck
much.
me.
I had to pick. I was like, I can't read 4 pages. It's just like it would have gone on and on. But yeah, I totally think you're right that this is a novel that is exploring the ideas of nuance and and perspective, and it's just wonderful that one of the few Trisolarans that we get interiority of is different. And we're like, oh, they're not monolithic either. Like, they are not a unified, nameless, faceless front. They also have nuance and personal desire and like conflict and ways. And that's like a moment where the character does drive the plot, because when he makes a crazy decision.
And when he's accused of pessimism, one of his defenses is, what is the first message that Earth gets from Trisolaris? And what is the first, when Earth, if you're saying that I'm pessimistic about other civilizations, what's the first thing Earth hears when they reach out into the void? Which is, be careful. Protect yourself. Your civilization is precious, and he's saying, no, that's optimistic. There's beauty out there. There's love out there. There's kindness out there. But there are also other things, I think.
So the section I'm going to read, and to catch everybody up, so the listener is the Trisolaran who receives Yen Wensea's message and learns about Earth and falls in love with it very quickly because it's beautiful, it's very stable, it's kind of a Edenic space. But then he gets really depressed because he realizes what is going to happen to the Earth because the Trisolarans are probably going to go and try to take it over. He's also aging, and he realizes that there's not much of a future for him, and that the only way for him to continue would be to find a mate. But he doesn't really have any prospects. Listeners have a very specific skill set. He's not going to be able to do anything. And when Trisolarans are no longer useful, they are forcibly dehydrated and burned. And he thinks about reporting it, and then realizes that, oh my gosh, if nobody has responded yet, I can respond and warn them off.
Yep.
The transmit button was a red rectangle. The listener's fingers hovered above it. The fate of the Trisolaran civilization was now tied to these slender fingers. Without hesitation, the listener pressed the button. A high-powered radio wave carried that short message, a message that could save another civilization, into the darkness of space. Do not answer! Do not answer! Do not answer! Then we get a little white space to connote a space and time jump. We don't know what the official residence of the Princeps of Trisolaris looked like, but we can be sure that thick walls separated him from the outside so as to protect him against the extreme weather. The pyramid from the three-body game was one guess about what it could look like. That they built the residence deep underground is another. 5 Trisolaran hours earlier, the Princeps received the report of the extra Trisolaran communication. 2 Trisolaran hours earlier, he received another report. Listening Post 1379 had sent out a warning message in the direction of the transmission. The first report did not cause him to leap up in ecstasy, and the second report did not cause him to sink into depression. He wasn't even angry or resentful. All of these emotions and other emotions, such as fear, sorrow, happiness, and appreciation of beauty, were things that the Trisolaran civilization strove to avoid and eliminate. Such emotions caused the individual and society to be weak spiritually and did not help with survival in the harsh environment of this world. The mental states the Trisolarans needed were calmness and numbness. The history of the past 200-some cycles of civilization proved that civilizations that relied on these two states as their spiritual core were the most capable of survival.
There's so much going on there. It also is kind of like a meta critique of fiction in a way too, right? It's almost like a case for Cixin Liu's style of writing and arguably sort of like Hemingway's style of writing, which is, you know, you describe circumstances and you describe characters, and then you let the audience, you give them maybe a little bit of internality. You know, and that we're basically what we're saying is Trisolaris survives because they learn not to be particularly emotional. You know, and what follows from that is the Princeps very coldly interrogating the listener, sentencing him to life, not death, because he wants the listener to live to see the invasion of Earth, which he loves, and then sentencing, you know, sort of like the listener's supervisor and what is it, like 3,000 colleagues to dehydration and death, like similarly dispassionately, without anger, without emotion too. There's so much going on there that you have this utterly kind emotional act then being balanced, you know, by the Princeps, who is he evil or is he just what you would need to be to survive on three body?
Yeah. And I think that's the question. Like, and I would aver that the answer is that he is not evil, and that like evil actually doesn't really have a place in this book.
Right.
And neither does good.
Right.
And, you know, I mean, it just like we said last time, there's a lot of Hamlet in this book. There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I really think that is what is being put forth here. And the calmness and the numbness are scary.
Yeah.
Because a person who is numb and calm about it, we also call that person, you know, like a sociopath.
But I was going to say Tom Ripley would get along with the Trisolarans.
Totally. But you pointed out when we were talking about Sherlock Holmes that in the BBC version that Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock is like, oh yes, I am a sociopath, high functioning.
Yeah.
And it's another unfolding of the nuanced nature of this book and its discussion of good, bad, does that even exist?
Yeah.
And you know, and I would even say that like the wild experiments of trying to arrive at the Sophons is like kind of a metaphorical exploration of that, where it's like, we're doing all these things and oh my God, we didn't expect that to happen. And it's, I really think that this book is about, you know, the unintended consequences of what we thought was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And both the listener and Yewensea, the description of when they press the button is almost exactly the same.
Yeah, and the description of when they hear the message is almost exactly the same too. And they're both reacting essentially to an authoritarian system that has destroyed their lives as they understand it, or nearly destroyed their lives. And yeah, and I mean, but, you know, Trisolaris probably wouldn't survive without the Princeps, right? You know, and, you know, the Chinese Republic probably wouldn't be the global near superpower it is today without, you know, the Great Leap Forward and, you know, 3 generations of authoritarianism and sacrifice, you know, and Cixin Liu is both saying like, well, that's empty and horrific, and it taxes a human person greatly, and at the same time, you know, there's a certain necessity baked into the universe for a certain ruthlessness. If we want to survive, and where do we find the balance? I don't think the book points to an answer in terms of where to find the balance. I think it just puts us into the character of beings, not just humans, but people. I think the Trisolarans are people, even if they're not humans, that are forced to grapple, and allows us to, you know, grapple alongside them in their shoes, you know, which is like, what else is literature for? Right,
exactly. You want to give us your reading, and then we'll go to trivia?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably just a, you know, I think this is intended to be a bit of, I think there's a sense of like, man, this book has been heavy up to this point. we need a little optimism. And, you know, I mean, we've just learned that Earth is doomed. So let me, I think we're just given a little, you know, a little respite. So as we talked, we'd already described this chapter. Wang Miao and Ding Yi are getting drunk, and Dasha shows up, and they're like, you know, come get drunk with us. We're screwed. We're going to be invaded. We can't develop science. And Dasha basically takes them on a ride. So I'll just start from here. Downstairs, the three got into Dasha's car. As the car started, Wang asked in a slurred speech where they were going. Dasha said, "My hometown, not too far." The car left the city and sped west along the Beijing-Shizashuang Highway. It exited the highway as soon as they were inside Hebei province. Dasha stopped the car and dragged his two passengers out. As soon as Ding and Wang got out of the car, the bright afternoon sun made them squint. The wheat fields of the North China Plain spread out before them. "What did you bring us here for?" Wang asked. "To look at bugs." Dasha lit one of the cigars Colonel Stanton had given him and pointed at the wheat fields with it. By the way, the cigars are this wonderful little like mini side plot that are just hilarious.
Best.
Wang and Ding now noticed that the fields were covered by a layer of locusts. Every wheat stalk had a few crawling over it. On the ground, more locusts wriggled like some thick liquid. "They're plagued by locusts here?" Wang brushed away some locusts from a small area near the edge of the field and sat down. "Like the dust storms. They started 10 years ago, but this year is the worst." "So what? Nothing matters now, Dasha." Ding spoke, his voice still drunk. "I just want to ask the two of you one question. Is the technological gap between humans and Trisolarans greater than the one between locusts and humans?" The question hit the two scientists like a bucket of cold water. As they stared at the clump of locusts before them, their expression grew solemn. They got Shiquang's point. That's his real name. "Look at them, the bugs." This is interesting, too, because it appears to be in Dasha's voice, but it's not quotations. It's just narration voice. So it's kind of like maybe this is the author. "Look at them, the bugs. Humans have used everything in their power to extinguish them. Every kind of poison, aerial sprays, introducing and cultivating their natural predators, searching for and destroying their eggs, using genetic modification to sterilize them, burning with fire, drowning with water. Every family has bug spray. Every desk has a fly swatter under it. This long war has been going on for the entire history of human civilization, but the outcome is still in doubt. The bugs have not been eliminated. They still proudly live between the heavens and the earth, and their numbers have not diminished from the time before the appearance of the humans. The Trisolarans who deemed the humans bugs seem to have forgotten one fact. The bugs have never been truly defeated. A small black cloud covered the sun and cast a moving shadow against the ground. This was not a common cloud, but a swarm of locusts that had just arrived. And as the swarm landed in the fields nearby, the three men stood in the middle of a living shower, feeling the dignity of life on earth. Ding Yi and Wang Miao poured the 2 bottles of wine they had with them on the ground beneath their feet, a toast to the bugs. Dashi, thank you. Wang held out his hand. I thank you as well. Ding gripped Dashi's other hand. Let's get back, Wang said. There's so much to do.
Yeah. That's good. It's a good ending, works, it's, despite the sort of like, oh, there's our timer.
Yep.
It fits really nicely, but whatever. It fits really nicely. I think it's great.
Another writer might have just ended it at, I just want to ask the two of you one question. Is the technological gap between humans and Trisolarans greater than the one between locusts and humans? ? That could be the end of the chapter. But then we go on this kind of lyrical exploration of the allegory. Yeah. We're like, okay, you get the allegory, but we're going to keep talking about it. And somehow that works. It actually really reminds me of that passage you read from the end of Cryptonomicon, when they're kind of marching through the forest in the Philippines, and he's talking about ants. It has a very similar feel to that, a kind of musing reverie.
He has got to have read a lot of Neal Stephenson. I mean, like that chapter about the computer made out of Trisolarans is so Stevensonian.
Yeah.
Just in its like its utter bigness.
No, it's like Daniel Waterhouse building a computer out of the organ,
exactly. It's marvelous.
But even bigger, Yeah. Yeah, and it does feel like almost like a love letter to Neal Stephenson.
Yeah, let's take this to 11 million. Yeah. This one goes to 11 million.
Yeah, I bet Neal Stephenson likes these books. I imagine he would.
Bet.
The imagination
they're similarly their sense of scope is similar.
All right. Well, let's do some trivia.
Yeah, you're up. You're the host.
Yep. All right. Let me get my... Okay. All right. So one of the technologies Cixin Liu references in the conflict between Earth and Trisolaris has a literary antecedent among one of the authors we've read or discussed broadly on this series.
Okay.
Is that technology A... ball lightning, which one of Joe Haldeman's characters develops as a weapon in the follow-up to the Forever War, Forever Peace.
Okay.
B, the Sophon, which is similar to a technology used by the aliens in Octavia Butler's Bloodchild. C, the nanomaterial, which is similar to the monowire used as a weapon by a character in William Gibson's Johnny Mnemonic.
Yep.
Or D, creating a blinking cosmic background illusion, which was a technique used by the Pearson puppeteers against the Cixin in Protector, a Larry Niven novel.
Amazing. An actual option, I think. Wow, that's great. Damn. Oh my gosh, these are all very plausible. I was waiting for the all of the above, which is what I wanted. So we got ball lightning, Sophon, similar to Octavia Butler. Give me C again.
The nanomaterial, the web, which is similar to the monowire, which is used by a weapon and a character in William Gibson's Johnny Mnemonic, a short story or kind of a novella.
I'm gonna go with the monowire because it is a enduring element of cyberpunk and sci-fi kind of like world building.
You are correct.
No way! Really?
Yeah. And so there's the character Molly from Neuromancer appears in that short story. And she actually has to fight one of those vat-grown ninjas. And that vat-grown ninja has a thumbnail that has been grown long according to Japanese custom, but it is detachable and becomes a monowire garrote, or which he can use as a fearsome weapon.
Oh my god!
If I remember correctly, it's something like that. But definitely, like one of the characters does use that the monowire. Maybe Molly uses it. I'm trying to remember, but they do have a fight. I will say also ball lightning is referenced, but that's a reference to an earlier Cixin Liu novel called Ball Lightning.
Okay.
And I believe that Ye Wenxia's daughter, who dies, is actually one of the characters in that novel, and maybe Ding Yi is as well. So,
interesting.
I did read it many years ago. It's not as good as this, but it's interesting. Apparently, in the foreword to that, Cixin Liu writes this foreword where he says that there's not a lot of Chinese science fiction, but a lot of it takes the form of the invention of a wondrous technology, like a story around that. And so Ball Lightning is a story like that. Yeah.
Wow, what an interesting cultural hiccup. That's
incredible.
incredible.
I mean, kind of like the Time Machine, right?
Okay.
I'm trying to think of what other kind of Western sci-fi, but and the Time Machine was a big influence on Cixin Liu too. The Time Machine, I mean, Frankenstein arguably, but I'm trying to think if there are others where it's like somebody invents a technology is like the basic premise of that.
Yeah, he said that he would read H.G. Wells under his father's bed because that's where his dad hid the books.
Yeah.
And it wasn't super contraband, but he couldn't ask other kids if they were reading those books too.
Yeah.
So he just had to kind of read them. I just love the idea of young Cixin Liu, reading H.G. Wells surreptitiously.
Yeah.
It's just a beautiful, beautiful image.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Cixin Liu has cited Russian literature as one of his chief influences. In particular, one author has provided him the model for his larger and longer works. Was that writer A, Fyodor Dostoevsky, B, Leo Tolstoy, C, Ivan Turgenev, or D, Lavrentiy Nevinovich?
Nice. The sort of moral experimentation would suggest Dostoevsky. But there's something about just the sprawling nature of Tolstoy and the sprawling nature of these books and the kind of the way time passes in Tolstoy and the way characters change over time and a kind of dispassionate observant that makes me think it's Tolstoy.
You got it. It's a 2 for 2 night.
Yeah, we both got it. Double ding, baby.
That's awesome. Double ding. Multiple climaxes.
That was a little too on the nose, wasn't it? Isn't double ding kind of more funny because it's less obvious?
Yeah, well, yeah, but I mean, do you even know me, bro?
Good point. Yeah. Yeah.
Why would I go for something nuanced when I could go for something obvious?
Indeed. Well, everybody, next up is the second book in this series, and I'm really excited about it. That is called The Dark Forest. We're going to read the first half of that next time. Chris Bagg, will you read this book again?
Yeah, for sure. I am going to read this book again. I want to settle into the parts, the really hard science parts of the final. It's the final part, the third part of the book, but it really takes up almost half of the pages of the book. Yeah. I would really not mind another pass through there. But this book was such wonderful, easy, reading, and I really enjoyed it, and my mind kept being expanded by it. And so I wouldn't mind going again to pick up the stuff that I'm sure I missed.
Yeah, I think I'll probably read them again, but probably not for a while, because this was my third time through. And I really enjoyed it the first time, and then I kind of read them again 5 years later, the second time, just because I was stuck with I just don't know what to read right now, and I know I like these books, and once I started reading, I was I'll just keep going. I kind of feel like I want to forget how it all builds and then settle into that again. So, I could see maybe reading it in 10 or 15 years again after it's all a little bit unfresh, when you get to that point where the books are just sort of distant memories and then the pleasure of the unfolding is renewed again. So, Yeah, well, Upper Middle Brow is a Small Point production. Chris Bagg and Jesse Dukes are the bugs that keep coming back. Music by Ben Pajak and Jesse Dukes. Design and website by Chris Bagg. We are supported by Jenny Grieve and Justin Reich. Thanks, guys. Find us on Patreon, where there are a number of tiers at which you could show your support for this show.
And as a reminder, everybody, Jesse and I are both writers and editors, and we can help you with your writing, podcasting, or editing project. You can see some of our portfolios and learn more at our respective websites, chrisbagg.com and jessedukes.com. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Remember, the bugs win.
Or they hang around.
They keep coming back.